Right, time for us to turn our attention to the Type 5 with Neil Treacy. Neil, good morning to you.
Morning, folks.
It's funny how Danny Cipriani is the little butterfly that sets off the tsunami in Irish rugby, but it might be, or it might not be. Maybe this is the conspiracy theorist that theory that the rugby fans in particular didn't know they needed to make them anxious this morning.
100%. Like, I mean, maybe the tsunami might be kind of a bit over the top, but in theory, like, it is Danny Cipriani deciding he wants to leave Gloucester is the chain reaction that turns all this Ben Healy talk from being, but probably we all might have suspected maybe a little bit of kite flying, an agent just trying to do his job to, in contract season to add an extra little bit onto a potential contract for his client. All of a sudden now, the fear is real from a Munster fan's point of view about Ben Healy and a potential move to Glasgow. Because to go through that chain reaction yesterday afternoon, Danny Cipriani announces that, I suppose to the surprise of people in Ireland, it doesn't seem like it came as a big surprise to people in England that he was leaving Gloucester with immediate effect. Now, reading through those stories, a lot of people were suggesting at the time that Gloucester had been in contact maybe with Adam Hastings of the Glasgow Warriors. They're out half. And quick as a flash, within about 2 hours, Gloucester themselves had actually confirmed the news that they had signed Adam Hastings. So when that flashed up on your Twitter timeline, all of a sudden you're thinking straight away it wasn't, that's a decent signing, whatever. It was, okay, the Glasgow Warriors are losing their first choice out half, while also sniffing around Munster's bright young prospect, Ben Healy. So all of a sudden things are looking incredibly real and live around that transfer and the potential of it. And it just means that the IRFU, they have to get straight into these negotiations in January, and they have to make him a decent offer. By all accounts, it seems that Glasgow have actually upped their offer again to Ben Healy over the last couple of weeks, probably knowing that Adam Hastings was going to leave. But I think there would be an enormous backlash from Munster fans. I think it would be absolutely enormous if Ben Healy was allowed to leave Ireland and move to the Glasgow Warriors, coming out of an academy deal in the next few months. I think there would be absolute uproar if that was to happen. And I think Munster have to put the contract out and keep him, because they don't necessarily know what the long-term future is going to be of Joey Carbery. He hasn't played in the guts of a year. He has been prone to injuries in the past. At that stage, you're kind of banking on Carbery and JJ Hanrahan as two senior out-halves in the squad. There needs to be a third option there. I know they have options, other options in the academy, but to let a player like with the potential of Ben Healy go would be just unforgivable, I think, particularly with the way Munster fans maybe might have seen the likes of Donnacha Ryan leaving in the past and things like that. And I think it would sting a lot if they were to let him go.
You just start him now and just put him up to number one out half at this point before Carbery comes back, assuming
they were about to, though, weren't they? Isn't that the thing?
Possibly. Well, like we were kind of wondering this week, was it going to happen? Was he going to get that start in Claremont? And now, obviously, he's injured, so we don't really know when he is going to be back at this stage. And that injury on Saturday or on Sunday evening from he was basically targeted with those two hits from Alex Dombrant and Joe Marler. Speaking to Johan van Graan afterwards, Van Graan, having dealt with him plenty of times at press conferences, he's a very, very cool man. He doesn't get rattled particularly easy. There have been incidences when we've been down in UL speaking to him around things like Gerbrand Grobler, things that have been quite controversial when he might have been a little bit prickly towards us in the media. But Sunday was the first time I ever really saw him actually really go on the offensive. Now he wasn't like absolutely seething or anything like that. He was quite calm and collected in the way he was saying, but he made a clear point of saying, some of those hits, they are not acceptable. It's just not something you do in rugby, because now we have, our out half is injured.
People won't have seen it. People might not have seen the hit. So there was a no-arm tackle was one of them.
Yeah, so the first one was very, very late. It was from Alex Dombrant, and he just charged up. And you can actually see the way he even turned his body. He he turned his body so that he actually was leading with the shoulder. It wasn't one of those ones where he just got caught on the wrong side. Like, if you were to look at the replay, you're actually asking yourself, and it was what Keith Wood was saying on commentary with me on Sunday evening, he's actually turning his body into an unnatural position to make the tackle. Now, we don't know which one of them, was it that one or a later one with Joe Marler, which one was it that actually caused the damage to the shoulder, because after both of them, he looked in a lot of pain. I saw people asking, should the referee be offering more protection to Ben Healy? I don't really know what more the referee could have done, because he gave Alex Dombrant a yellow card. It wasn't a red card offence. He gave him the yellow card he could give him.
It's interesting you say that, right? It's interesting. Like, at some point, all sports decide that they're going to protect their most important players. The tackle from behind gets outlawed in football, essentially after Diego Maradona's ankles get broken to the point where he can no longer play at the level that he should be playing. Marco van Basten, his career completely ruined by the fact that you were allowed to tackle from behind. In American football, you can't touch the quarterback anymore because too many of the quarterbacks, who are the highest paid players, were missing vast chunks of the season because cheap shots essentially were costing them injuries around the legs and ankles. And at some point, rugby's going to decide that if you do tackle an out half late, or an unprotected player, so somebody who has just kicked a ball late, that it's going to be a red card. You say it's not a red card now, and I appreciate that it's not, but there's been a sea change in everybody's thoughts about the brutality and the physicality and the gladiatorial. Yeah, exactly. Of the sport, to the point where I think it's credible that these tackles will become red card tackles sooner rather than later, Neil. That's my contention, that like by the end of next season or before the next World Cup, an unprotected player who gets tackled or body checked or landed on, and if you land on them with the weight of your body, that's the other thing that they do in American football. You can't just body slam somebody when you're falling. You have to protect yourself or protect them by protecting yourself. That these are going to become red card tackles, because you can't have the out halves and the skilled players being brutalised on purpose and it only be a yellow card.
I'm not so sure on that, because I think aside from the instance on Sunday with Ben Healy, like there isn't a huge habit in rugby. There aren't too many instances that you could pick out every single week.
Johnny Sexton in countless games against France. Like, every out half I've ever watched gets done after the ball.
Quite a few years ago, those games against France. Like, I don't think it happens too much, to be totally honest, these days. Like, I think the comparable situation is the way they've clamped down on anything that goes near the head in the last few years, and how that, like, those things are automatically red cards. Even complete accidents are red cards, and I think it's right that they should be, because that is the incredibly sensitive area. That is the area, the really unprotected area of a player. I don't really see what the referee could have done aside from giving a yellow card for the Dombrant one. The Joe Marler one was one of those ones where there wasn't a huge amount of force in it, so like it was up in the air between a penalty and a yellow card. In the end, he went with a penalty, but the fact that he didn't give him a yellow card, I don't really think had any impact, because there weren't any more cheap shots afterwards. There wasn't anything he could have done afterwards. But no, I'm not so sure we're going to see hits like that, particularly on just one specific type of player.
Well, it's any player who is defenceless. That's the point. So it can happen at any stage. So it could be a scrum half. It could be somebody once they are defenceless, once they can't brace themselves. It's easy to make those rules. And look, I think that rugby is.
I think if there's head contact, you're going to see red cards for them. I don't think just kind of hits onto the shoulder. For me, I don't think you're going to see those as red cards.
All right, to go back to Ben Healy for a moment, it would be a disaster for Munster, and it would be a disaster for Irish rugby if their brightest current, so him and Harry Byrne are considered to be the brightest out-half prospects we have. Munster absolutely needs somebody who's homegrown to come through and take that 10 slot. It's a storied jersey. It is a massive tradition that Munster has a 10 who is respected around Europe. If they let him go to join Scotland, that would be ridiculous.
It would be, particularly if, like, you get the feeling if it was to happen, details would come out about, what the contract situations were, and if it was revealed or anything like that the IRFU allowed him to leave because they held off on maybe 10 to 20 grand a year, I think there would be absolute uproar for that to happen. Now, Ben Healy in 5 or 6 years could turn out to be an almighty flop. You know, he's played 10 games of senior rugby. We don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but all the signs are suggesting that he's going to be an excellent player. And particularly with the way Munster are, they're at a stage where they're finally producing homegrown players that they've been criticised for not doing for the last 10 years. And if they finally started to do that, and all of a sudden one of those brightest prospects was allowed to leave because the RFU were to skimp on on a deal that they could offer him, I think there'd be absolute uproar.
Yeah, I can't see the Munster fans standing for that. I mean, this is a marching on Lansdowne Road style situation. If he does end up joining Scotland, it would be absolutely ridiculous, giving Scotland the opportunity to have an out half for a decade in the whatever the league is going to be called, the Pro 16, and then also in the Six Nations, and potentially playing against us now in a World Cup. What? No thanks. Right, team selections are going to have a big impact on pools and how the provinces progress, because we know already that some teams are taking European competition a little less seriously than in other years.
Yeah, and unfortunately, because of the nature of this season's competition, where it's just 4 pool games as opposed to the usual 6, it means it's happening a little earlier than it might have in previous seasons. Like Gloucester and Northampton Saints, to name 2 in particular anyway. But it kind of just ties back into something we were talking about last week, where we're kind of seeing that because the pool stage is much shorter this time around and there are less matches, we're seeing a lot more teams going for it and kind of producing these blowout scores. Like, I was looking across at the 2 pools, and Pool B in particular, Munster's pool, of the 12 teams in that pool. So of all the teams who won games at the weekend, Munster were the only team that actually didn't win with a bonus point. So even just looking across at their game this weekend against Claremont, I mean, if they were to go there and not pick up a losing bonus point at the very, very least, then they would be in a lot of bother already, even though they were only 1-1 at that stage. Looking through some of the other teams, like Leon going up against Glasgow this weekend, Leon won by 50 odd points against Gloucester. They're playing a Glasgow side who were hammered by 40 points against Exeter. You would probably assume that Glasgow might not necessarily be particularly up for this. This could be another 5-pointer for Leon. They can go to 10 points. All of a sudden, you've got one team at maximum points from 2 games. Ulster going to Gloucester. Gloucester are probably going to throw out a second team. That means Ulster, you would probably assume they're going to get their first win of the campaign as well. Thankfully, though, there is a game in Pool B, something like Toulouse-Exeter, where 2 sides who had pretty good wins last week are going up against each other, and finally you're looking at one of those teams and going, thank God someone's going to be taking points from each other. But it just is a bit disappointing that the DPCR would have pulled enormous amount of strings and completely restructured this tournament for a lot of teams to get them into the competition and to make sure that everybody who was in contention to qualify didn't miss out on a fractured season in the Premiership or the Pro 14 or the Top 14, only to, after one game, see them throwing out second string sides. I think maybe down the line in the future, there needs to be some sort of a code of conduct, a best practice thing, where teams at the very least have to commit to playing. It's going to be tough to word it, but playing some version of their best side available to them.
Munster, the only side in Pool B who won without a bonus point, all of a sudden that's a tricky situation.
It is, and I do think it was something I kind of hinted at last week as well. I do think at the end of this pool stage campaign, we are going to have to, when we're kind of doing our analysis on teams and kind of figuring out, had they a good tournament, had they a bad one, I don't think we can judge it solely on did they qualify for the quarterfinals or didn't they, because I think depending on the teams you're playing, you could have 3 wins out of 4. You could even have 4 wins from 4. We're not even entirely certain, and you could actually miss out on the quarterfinals simply because you weren't able to get bonus points, and you might have won away from home against particularly good teams, which in its own right is a fantastic result. So I think at the end of this in January, when we see who has and hasn't qualified for the quarterfinals, I don't think that should necessarily be the bar for us judging did they have a decent campaign. I think you have to look a little bit deeper into the performances as well.
All right. Pat Lamb and John Muldoon heading back to the sports ground. Connacht can be quite proud of the rugby they're playing at the moment and the rattle that they gave Racing in Paris. They need to win their home games, though.
They do, and I think I included this just more so for the occasion than anything else, because it's just going to be it's just a nice thing for Pat Lam and John Muldoon and Conor McPhillips as well to be able to go back to the sports ground with Bristol, because granted Bristol shipped 50 points to Claremont last week, but they scored 39 of their own. They played some brilliant rugby and have been playing some brilliant rugby for the last year or two, and I just think there's a fantastic project that Pat Lam is building there at Bristol. And look, I know they've been backed by a billionaire essentially, and they're spending a lot of money, and they've brought in some world stars. But there is I've been to Bristol a couple of times before on rugby trips, and it's a brilliant rugby town. They seriously get behind the team, and there's just something fantastic that Pat Lam is doing there. And he's reaching out, and he's continuing to keep that Connacht connection as well. Like I mentioned, some of the coaches, Jay Keenan was already there, one of his ex-Connacht players, or that he brought, sorry. And in the last year or so, Ní Adialokan, one of his Pro 12 winning stars, Peter McCabe, another ex-Connacht player, has gone there as well. So he's keeping that tradition alive and keeping those links between the two. And I think it's going to be a massive pity that there's going to be no crowd at the sports ground this weekend, because you'd be sure that Pat Lam and John Muldoon, the reception they would have got, win, lose or draw this weekend between Bristol and Connacht at the sports ground, it would have been fantastic, and it just would have been a lovely occasion. Yeah, no, you can definitely see them being in the mix for Irish coaching tickets in the future, or if a provincial gig comes up that they would be interested in, they might be able to get the money they deserve this time. Home advantage or lack of it, how advantageous is it to have a fortress like Thomond Park and all of a sudden it be stripped away from you for the opposition? Yeah, it's not looking as advantageous anymore, and it seems that the crowd is specifically what seems to be making a home advantage so important to teams. So, granted, some of the wins on Sunday probably evened it out a little bit more, but 7 of the 12 winners from this weekend's opening round of matches were won by the away side, and after Saturday's games, it was actually 7-1 in favour of the away teams. Leinster, they did the job against Harlequins, but now they are going to Stade Marcel Michelin to take on Claremont, one of the toughest grounds you could possibly be going to in Europe to play a game. You'd probably have it up there. Basically, that and Thomond Park seem to be the two real fortresses around Europe, and you're going to have to wonder how big of an advantage, or how much of a loss is the home advantage as such to the Claremont fans, because they make an enormous amount of noise. Munster would have seen it in the times that they would have been there, particularly back in 2015, and they were there in 2007-8 as well. I'm really interested just to see how Munster deal with the occasion, how JJ Hanrahan deals with the occasion as well. He's been a player that you've questioned maybe his ability to handle the pressure sometimes, and now he's in a situation where my brother texted me saying, last night saying, if Ben Healy is out, maybe JJ Hanrahan's going to play a lot freer because there's nobody breathing down his neck. Then you're also wondering, does JJ Hanrahan start to think, all of this is now on me? I have to go out and do this. There isn't necessarily an out half in behind me. And you'd have maybe some doubts about his ability to handle those pressures, those big moments, looking back to big kicks last year that he would have missed in games. It's going to be interesting to see it, and I don't know. I'm just very curious to see how Munster handle that away game in France. I think if they come away with a losing bonus point, stop Claremont getting a bonus point themselves, it is a serviceable result, I think. But give them an outside shot at a victory. Claremont were unbelievable last weekend, though, as well, weren't they? Right. That is the problem. So many of these teams are actually really good, but it's been a brilliant competition so far, and the quality of performance that we saw from Leinster was interesting. We talked before about the set piece and how it goes for Leinster over the period. It's going to be interesting. So we're not going to just make a snap judgment on one performance last week. We're going to see how they go over the next couple of weeks before we kind of get your assessment on that versus how well it was going for Ireland. But the depth of the Leinster squad, like, we've known about it. We've known how difficult it is to get into the team. We've seen how quickly players can go from fringe Leinster to Leinster team to Ireland team. And then last week it was you're going from Ireland team to Leinster bench, and the Leinster team didn't miss a beat. Yeah, and it was, I don't know, I think it was nice, a nice kind of show of faith from Leo Cullen in particular as well, to to give those guys who had been plugging away in the Pro 14 their kind of big day out in the Heineken Champions Cup. Now, I know there were some internationals brought back into the starting team, but, you know, for the most part, it was guys who'd been doing it over the last few weeks and, you know, got their show of faith. And it was funny as well, you mentioned there, you know, looking at the line-out situation, the set-piece situation with Leinster, considering how many Irish players they have, we probably can't really get any read into their performance of it against Montpellier, because so many of those guys weren't involved with Ireland over the course of the last couple of months. And I just think it's incredibly impressive overall to be able to send a combination of a first team and a combination of a first team and a third team in parts as well, over to France and beating Montpellier with a bonus points. Like, Montpellier, they probably aren't the level they were at maybe 2-3 seasons ago when people were tipping them to be contenders in Europe, but they're still an incredibly strong, an incredibly physical side away in France. I think that was one of the big results where you realise just the importance of home advantage as well, seeing Leinster pretty much stroll to a bonus point, like, down in an incredibly tough place to go as well.
Yeah, for sure. Neil, that's this week's Type 5. Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys.
It's Neil Treacy there. More Heineken Champions Cup action coming your way this weekend.